I remember when we learned of the shooting on April 30th, and how everyone who heard that news, wherever they were, whatever political party they belonged to, however many guns they own or do not own, thought of their kids or their time in college or just their communities, and the fact that people live in fear and also live with the knowledge that this may be inevitable for them. I cannot tell you how many people I've met in college or in high school or in middle school who know exactly what bookshelf they're going to pull down when the shooter enters their classroom. Or the very chilling interview with a student who survived the massacre at Santa Fe High School in Texas, and the reporter puts the microphone in front of her face just after the shooting and says, were you shocked, were you surprised that a gunman entered your school and began to kill your classmates? And she said, no, I knew that was going to happen sooner or later. Students who think this is just a matter of time. My 8-year-old Henry, towards the end of his first grade year, doing an active shooter drill, and I'm thinking about that teacher who, and I think this is true in North Carolina as it is true in Texas, may be holding a second or a third job just to make ends meet, who out of her own pocket is paying not just for classroom supplies or decorations, but the meal for that child who's on free and reduced breakfast and lunch but does not have a dinner to go home to, who buys a set of clothes for the kid who showed up in the same set of clothes every day of the week, and who in addition, y además, is teaching that child to read and to write and to add and to subtract, now has to worry about herding those kids into a closet and teaching them to resist the impulse to open the door when someone bangs on it saying, let me in, open up. That shooter in El Paso, Texas in the Walmart, I've met with many of the survivors and the families of the victims who lost their lives, including parents who were there with their kids. These were soccer coaches who were selling lemonade and horchata to raise money to send that team to Tucson, Arizona for a tournament. And those parents did what all of us would do in the same situation, trying to make sure their kids were safe, sent them running, in some cases confronted the gunman with nothing against an AK-47. But some of those kids told us that when they ran into hiding, they could hear the gunmen saying, come out, I know that you're in there. There are other kids in El Paso know that story now as well. You ask what we're going to do. We laid out the plan, the policy, the steps we want to take, but you're asking, I think, how in the world are we going to do that if we have failed to do that over the last 30, 40, 50 years in this country? I hold out some hope after having gone to a gun show in Conway, Arkansas. Now, I've got to admit to you, I did not think that was the best idea. The day before, we had released a proposal saying that we were going to have a mandatory buyback of AR-15s and AK-47s, precisely the guns that were being sold at this gun show, being purchased by the people that I was talking to. But to my surprise, a gentleman came up to me, recognized me, introduced himself, and he was one of the sellers at the show, and I said, we lose 40,000 people in this country to gun violence. I came here to learn what your solution to this is. And the guy tells me I should not be able to sell at this show. Because of this state's gun laws, if you're 18 years old and you have a pulse and you show up at my counter, I have to sell you this gun. Well, I don't have to, but I can, and I do, and I make a lot of money doing that. Somebody who was a professed Trump supporter, owns an AR-15, said, I'd be willing to give that up if it would save lives. Another person who owned an AR-15 said, no way in hell are you taking this gun from me, but Beto, I have 3 kids who are in school as well, and I'm concerned about this too. And so what I learned in that community, that may be more Republican than it is Democrat, is those folks care just as much about this issue. If we bring them in instead of writing them off, then they may be part of the solution going forward. And we may not be able to go the full distance in the first year, but I think we can make some progress, perhaps on background checks, on red flag laws, and maybe stopping the sale of those AR-15s. So that's the way that I propose to do it. Going everywhere to everyone, bringing them into the conversation, into the solution, and hopefully into that legislation that passes. Thanks for asking. Appreciate it.
Good evening, Congressman O'Rourke.
Good evening.
I'm Ethan Gonzalez, and I was looking at your website earlier, and I noticed that you were calling that action with climate change. And which I but however, I have a few questions. First off, how will it be paid for? Secondly, how much as taxes? And third, what will all that entail?
Great question. So we provided the context for why we've got to act on climate change earlier, right? All the stuff that's happening to us right now. My 3 kids who were raised in El Paso, Texas, that city just had its 14th day of 100-degree plus heat in the month of August, which broke the record for as long as we've been keeping records in El Paso. Houston, Texas, 58 inches of rain in one storm in 2017, the landfall record for North America. In Iowa, both the Mississippi and the Missouri River have flooded to record levels. California, record drought followed by record fires, etc., etc. It's just going to get worse. And some of these communities in the not too distant future will not support human life unless we get it right. So when you ask, how are we going to pay for it? One of the questions that I think of is, how in the world can we not pay for it now? Because the cost over the long term is not in the millions or billions or even single-digit trillions. It'll be tens or hundreds of trillions of dollars, either to bail out or save or restore or have to flee communities altogether. So I propose that over the next 10 years, we mobilize $5 trillion, $1.5 trillion of direct federal spending, local, state matches, and investments made in renewable energy projects, so that the United States, instead of China, takes the global lead on the technologies and the products and the services that will dominate the economy of this planet. I want those jobs, I want the wealth that comes from that to be right here in the United States. I also want to make sure that communities are resilient. So we know what's going to happen to New Orleans or El Paso or Charleston, where I just was, or Miami. Investing in the long-term resiliency of those communities, the infrastructure they need to survive, we've got to make that investment now, or it'll be doubly or triply expensive down the road. And so part of our spending is focused on making sure that people are okay, and then also acknowledging the racial dynamic of climate change. The best predictor of your proximity to a polluter right now is your race and your income level in America. Some neighborhoods are closer to some polluters than others, and there's a connection to all of that. And so let's make sure that those communities who've been last in our environmental policy are first when it comes to spending to make sure that they are okay. And then one last point, and then I'll talk about the pay for. One last point, and that is we've got to make sure that we bring everyone into this. And I was talking about that earlier with guns, but I'll talk about this when it comes to climate. Listening to farmers, they want to be able to provide the environmental services that will save this planet. So if we paid them, for example, to plant cover crops, which pull more carbon out of the air, sequester that in the soil, if we used no-till or low-till farming, regenerative agriculture, ranching, and production, not only do we restore the health of our soil, in our water, in our air, not only can we be more conscientious about how we produce our food, but we're also contributing meaningfully to arresting the 2 degrees Celsius warming that we're on pace to hit if we do not change course. And then if we take global leadership, re-sign the Paris climate agreements, that's a great first step, but we have to go much further than that. And really the United States can only do that if we lead by example. The pay-fors, we just took the corporate tax rate, or Donald Trump did, and those who voted for it, from 35% to 21%. If we just took it up to 28%, not all the way back to where it was, but to 28, we would generate hundreds of billions of dollars over the next 10 years. If we taxed capital gains at the same rate that we tax wage income or ordinary income or salaries for Americans, we would generate hundreds of billions. If we ended the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Somalia, Libya, and Yemen, just to name 6 places that we're at war tonight, wars that have added nearly $6 trillion to the national debt, not only would we then really have the backs of our service members and acknowledge and honor their service and the veterans who preceded them, but we would also save trillions of dollars over the long term. Y por último, if we were to legalize America, those 10 million undocumented, working some of the toughest jobs, making our communities safer by their very presence, we project a $200 billion windfall to the national economy, which more than pays for the plan that we just described. Sorry for the long answer, but it was an important question. Appreciate it. Very impressed.
student debt relief?
Yes, the question's about student loan debt, accessibility of higher education. I was remembering this yesterday. I was at Benedict College in South Carolina, and an English major was asking me the same question. And I told her that I had taken out student loans, and my dad had taken out loans. He could borrow against the value of his house, something that not every American can do because some Americans were not allowed to literally borrow money to buy a house. And I came home and I told him in my sophomore, junior year of college that I was an English major. And I just remember the look of disappointment on his face that we took out all these loans, you took out loans, and you're going to read books. But I was fortunate enough to be able to qualify and be able to do that and be able to pay them back when I began to work after college. We know that not every American can do that. We have $1.5 trillion outstanding right now, about a 10% default rate. And student loan debt is the one kind of debt you can never wipe off the books. It stays with you until you pay it off or until you're in the grave. Cynthia, we were with someone yesterday who was a teacher at Benedict College. She told me she's 71 years old. She's a professor at a college, and she's still paying back her student loan debt. That's really messed up. So here's my proposal. If you have outstanding student loan debt, we will refinance it at the lowest possible interest rates. Right now, the federal government is on track to make $8 billion off of the student loan repayments that people are making all across this country. We shouldn't be making a dime off that. We should be investing in our fellow Americans. Second, if you are willing to work in public education or public service, you want to work one of the 40,000 unfilled jobs at the VA and take care of a veteran who's put their life on the line for this country. You want to provide some kind of public service in America, we will wipe clean and clear your student loan debt. It won't take you 10 years to qualify and jumping through hoops and red tape. We'll begin year one to write that off so you can focus on that public service. And then lastly, if you have not yet gone to college and are thinking about doing it, I want to make sure that it is affordable. So the first 2 years are free, and then 4-year education is debt-free, but not just for tuition. It's tuition, it's room, it's board, it's books. If we do all of that, and then if we also elevate unions and the ability to join an apprenticeship and learn a skill or a trade completely debt-free, then everyone will be educated enough or be connected to the right career to be able to perform to their full potential in their lives. And that means that we as an economy and as a country are able to do that as well. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it.
If you're on the street to your left, on the street to your left. Here.
My name is Nikki, and I had a question. I wanted to know if it was in our country's best interest to stay more involved with the world, or if we see little love.
Great question, and it's an open question right now. Is it in the interest of the United States of America to be more involved with the rest of the world or less involved with the rest of the world? You obviously see the trajectory that we're on right now. We're literally trying to build a 2,000-mile wall, 30 feet high, at a cost of $30 billion. And it was reported today that Donald Trump instructed people who work for the federal government to go ahead and begin taking the land, even if it's against the law, promising to pardon them afterwards. Reneging on our commitment at the UN when it comes to the Paris climate agreements, dropping out of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that stopped Iran from developing a nuclear weapon, turning our backs on the European Union, on Canada, on Mexico, on our traditional allies, openly questioning the value of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, whose mutual defense clause has been invoked only once, and that was when we were attacked on 9/11, 2001. And to what end? He's embracing thugs and dictators and strongmen like Vladimir Putin, who he invited into our election and then sought to cover up for him. Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, who is bombing the country of Yemen into the last century and into the next great humanitarian crisis. Duterte in the Philippines, Al-Sisi in Egypt. Not only is he sending the signal that we are withdrawing from the world, but when we're connected, if we still are, it is going to be to dictatorships and autocracies, not to the great democracies with whom we have so much in common right now. So, as president, I want to make sure that we reestablish the standing of the United States around the world, that we use conferences like the G7 that we were just at, not only to improve our economic fate, but to address issues like climate change before it consumes us, nuclear proliferation, the issues that really challenge the world, that demand U.S. leadership if we're going to make it at the end of the day. So let's restore our standing, our power, and our ability to inspire the rest of the world. We can still do it, but we've got to remove the guy in office first to make it happen. Thank you for asking. Appreciate it. Here we go. Thank you, sir. You've been very patient.
Greetings. Thank you. What suggestions do you have for voter complacency? For example, my neighbor dropped by today and I said, I'm going to go see Beto at work. And he goes, oh, who is he? Where is he playing?
Who is this guy? So, excellent question. And I think with so many of these really thoughtful questions, it really helps to understand why people are complacent. I used to be very judgmental about those who didn't vote until I learned the facts. So Texas had ranked 50th in voter turnout, not by accident, but by design. If you're black, if you're Mexican American, if you're not in the majority of this country, there was a good chance that you were literally drawn out of a congressional district to diminish the power of your vote, or the likelihood that we would ever hear your voice. And people reached the logical conclusion that their vote counted for something less than someone else's. It's just a fact. And so 50th in the country, not because we love our democracy any less or because we're apathetic, it's because we were literally drawn that way. It is by design. So what's the answer to that? In this Senate election in 2017 and 2018, we went to every single one of those 254 counties. We went to the bluest places in Texas to make sure that no one was taken for granted and no one felt like they were taken for granted. Listening to everyone's stories, bringing them in. We went to colleges and universities and high schools even, though even members of our campaign team warned me against doing that because young people historically have not voted. And I said, look, I wouldn't vote either if no one showed up to my college or my university or my high school and listened to my story. I'll grab that from you in a second. And then we also went to not the reddest counties in Texas, but the reddest counties on planet Earth. King County voted for Donald Trump 96% in the last election. But we showed up because I hope you agree they're every bit as deserving of our respect, of our attention, of being heard, of being fought for, of being represented. If you don't show up, we will not know what's on their minds and the expectations they have set for us. And maybe, just maybe, if we show up and we win and we deliver for them, then they'll support us again in the next election. At the end of the day, though we did not defeat Ted Cruz, we saw record turnout in Texas. Young voter turnout up 500% from the last midterm election during early voting. Won more votes than any Democrat has in the history of the state of Texas. Won independence for the first time in decades. And along with my mother, more than 400,000 other Republicans voted for us in that election. And here are the results. Not only did we have the greatest turnout in a midterm on record, we elected 2 new members of Congress, both Democrats replacing Republicans, flipped the House of Representatives, changed the composition of our state legislature, and in Harris County, home to Houston, Texas, 17 African American women elected to judicial positions, changing the face of criminal justice. So, we gotta get out there, get after it, show up for everyone, knock on doors, especially going into September 10th, bring everybody into this one. Thank you for asking. Appreciate it.
Same area in the street. Here we go.
In the street?
Hi, my name is Kyle. I am a gay man living here in North Carolina. Title 822. So my question is more of a pragmatic one. I know that you support the Equality Act, that you're a strong supporter of LGBT rights. But oftentimes I feel as though our national organizations focus on things that are for the good of New York, California, Washington, where they're not thinking about the reality on the ground here in the South. Versus, like, for example, Equality Utah was able to pass non-discrimination protections in Utah, of all places, but had religious exemptions. Would you support, if you could get it through a Republican-controlled Senate and a Democratic House, a LGBT protections law with significant religious exemptions?
No. Just to be honest and clear, if I understand the question, I don't want, on religious grounds, anyone to be exempted from equal treatment under the law in this country. We know in Texas, for example,